2,500 years ago, under the thick branches of a quiet fig tree, a man sat unmoving, determined, worn thin by hunger and exhaustion, yet driven by a need deeper than physical comfort, the need to end suffering. This man was Siddhartha Gautama, once a prince with silk garments and golden plates, now just skin and bone draped in the simplest cloth, surrounded by silence. What happened that night didn't just change his life. It altered the human understanding of reality itself. But not in the way most people think. There were no miracles, no fire in the sky, no supernatural transformations. There was no floating into the air or glowing like a god. What truly unfolded beneath that tree might be even more astonishing than any myth. The story we've heard about enlightenment is often cloaked in mystery and awe, visions of monks levitating or beaming wisdom with every breath. But what if the truth was far more intimate, far more human? What if awakening wasn't about becoming something more, but about shedding what we never truly were? The night deepened around Siddhartha, and he faced his own mind with unwavering attention. Distractions, desires, and fears. Each came forward, like ghosts of a life once lived. In the old texts, Mara appears, not as a demon from another world, but as everything that pulls us away from ourselves. Every temptation, every memory, every grasping urge whispered to him, trying to shake his stillness. But Siddhartha stayed. He didn't fight his thoughts or push them away. He just watched quietly, and that made all the difference. In that silence, insight bloomed. Not just one insight, but three that spiraled through his awareness. First, he saw his past lives unfold, not as fantasies, but as deep memory, the patterns of birth and rebirth playing through countless forms. Then came the realization of the endless cycle that all beings were caught in: birth, suffering, death, and birth again. And finally, the realization that would become the heart of everything he would teach: the Four Noble Truths. The recognition of suffering, the understanding of its roots, the possibility of its end, and the path that leads there. At the break of dawn, when the morning star pierced the sky, something shifted. Siddhartha became the Buddha, not because he had gained something, but because he had seen through everything. He spoke no grand declarations, but in the verses preserved in the Dhammapada, his words held the power of stillness. Through many births I wandered, seeking the builder of this house. Painful is repeated birth. House builder, you are seen. You shall build no house again. All your rafters are broken, your ridgepole shattered. My mind has attained the unconditioned. Achieved is the end of craving. These weren't the words of a man who had become divine. They were the words of someone who had stopped identifying with illusion. What's extraordinary is what didn't happen. He didn't become immortal. He still aged. He still felt hunger, heat, cold. But the relationship he had with all of it changed. Suffering, the kind we create through resistance, through clinging and craving, ceased. This isn't the enlightenment people expect. It's not a fantasy realm where nothing hurts. It's a radical clarity, a seeing through, a dissolving of all the filters we place between ourselves and reality. As the monk Thanissaro Bhikkhu described it, the Buddha didn't gain a timeline of the universe, but a multi-dimensional view of experience itself. He understood suffering not as a concept, but as a pattern, a process. And more importantly, he understood how it ended, not through escape, but through full contact with reality, without distortion. After this awakening, the Buddha didn't retreat into silence forever. He didn't disappear into the mountains. He stood up, brushed the dust from his robe, and began walking. For 45 years, he walked across India, teaching anyone who would listen. His first talk wasn't about powers or miracles. It was about a path, a practical, grounded path. But our modern imagination paints a different picture. When most people hear the word enlightenment, they envision someone glowing on a mountaintop, eyes closed in permanent bliss, untouched by the noise of life. They see a person who never gets upset, who floats above problems, who maybe even reads minds. The reality, however, is very different. In fact, it might shock you. Zen master Qing Yuan once said, "Before I studied Zen, mountains were mountains and waters were waters. When I began to study, mountains were no longer mountains and waters were no longer waters. But now mountains are again mountains and waters are again waters. This cryptic-sounding phrase hides something profoundly simple. Enlightenment isn't about discovering something foreign. It's about seeing the ordinary with fresh eyes, unfiltered, undistorted. Reality just as it is. And here's the part that throws people off. Many masters have said that their initial awakening was, well, underwhelming. The 13th century Zen master Dogen wrote that realization often feels like the most mundane thing in the world. You expect divine fireworks and end up with the spiritual equivalent of a Tuesday afternoon. The 9th century master Linji even went as far as saying, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. It wasn't a call to violence, it was a warning. Even the concept of enlightenment, if clung to, becomes an obstacle. There's a famous story in Zen. A monk asked Master Zhaozhou, "What is enlightenment?" The master replied, "Have you eaten your rice porridge?" The monk said yes. Zhaozhou answered, "Then wash your bowl." That's it. No secret teaching, no sacred mantra, just the full presence in the smallest act. Washing your bowl can be a doorway to awakening if you're truly there for it. The Buddha himself warned against blind belief. In the Kalama Sutta, he said not to believe something just because it's tradition, or because he said it, or because it's written in a scripture. He encouraged people to test everything against their own experience. That alone breaks the myth that enlightenment is a mystical state only accessible to a few chosen ones. It's something anyone can touch, through deep honesty and direct experience. What's more, truly awakened people often appear completely normal. They laugh, they get tired, they enjoy a good meal. As Shunryu Suzuki put it, if you think you're enlightened, you're not. Real awakening brings humility, not superiority. It removes the craving to be seen as wise. It's not about becoming someone special. It's about realizing you were never separate to begin with. The Thai forest monk Ajahn Chah had a beautiful way of putting it. Looking for peace is like looking for a turtle with a mustache. You won't find it, but when your heart is ready, peace will come looking for you. Enlightenment isn't something you chase. It's something that arises when the chasing stops. And here lies the paradox. The more you want enlightenment, the further away it seems. You start meditating to find peace, and suddenly you're obsessed. Am I enlightened yet? Was that moment it? How about now? This trap of wanting to attain something, to become something new, only reinforces the ego. And enlightenment isn't something the ego can grasp. It's the dissolving of ego itself. This ties into one of Buddhism's deepest insights, anatta, or not self. The idea that the self we cling to isn't solid or permanent. It's a shifting dance of sensations, thoughts, perceptions. It's not that you lose your identity when you awaken. It's that you finally see it for what it truly is. Open, fluid, interconnected. Liberation doesn't come from gaining something new. It comes from seeing through the illusion of a fixed self. And yet in meditation circles, in spiritual communities, the trap repeats itself. People compete. Who can sit the longest? Who had the most powerful vision? Who's the most advanced? Someone gets a moment of bliss and believes they've arrived. Another sees lights during meditation and thinks they've been chosen. But the truth is, genuine awakening can't be captured or owned. It's not an achievement to boast about. It's not something you wear like a badge. Dogen again offered a deep reminder. To study the way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. And how many of us are truly trying to forget ourselves? Most of us, truthfully, are trying to improve the self, to become a shinier, more spiritual version of the same ego. And this becomes dangerous, especially when spiritual teachers start believing their own hype. History is full of self-declared enlightened masters who demanded devotion, claimed supernatural gifts, or abused their power. They used enlightenment as a crown, not as a responsibility. But the Buddha himself said, don't follow something just because it sounds wise. Examine, question, see for yourself. That's where real wisdom begins, not with belief, but with experience. And that's the foundation we'll keep building on. In spiritual circles, there's a term that's gained a lot of traction lately, spiritual bypassing. It sounds benign at first, even a little elegant, but its consequences can be anything but. It's the tendency to use spiritual ideas or practices to sidestep unresolved emotional issues, psychological wounds, or even basic human responsibilities. And the moment you start believing you're somehow above it all, that you've transcended the need to confront your anger, your attachments, your trauma, that's when you've quietly stepped into the enlightenment trap. You'll often hear people say things like, "It's all just emptiness," or "There is no right or wrong, everything is perfect as it is." These sound like profound statements on the surface, but used carelessly, they become dangerous. Because if everything is perfect, why bother trying to make anything better? Why take responsibility for how we treat others? Why apologize? Why grow? Why change? But true awakening never leads to indifference. On the contrary, it sharpens our sensitivity. It makes us more responsive, not less. Enlightenment, real and grounded, doesn't dissolve morality. It intensifies it. It doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you touch everything more fully. When you see clearly, you can't look away from suffering. You don't say, "It's all illusion," and walk off. You kneel down, you listen, you offer your presence. That's the paradox of awakening. It doesn't remove you from the world. It drops you right into the heart of it. This is why those who proclaim their enlightenment the loudest are often the furthest from it. They parade their insights, wear their spiritual vocabulary like armor, and demand admiration. But the truly awakened? They don't advertise. They don't have to. As the Tao Te Ching says, "Those who know do not speak. Those who speak do not know." The deeper your realization, the less you feel the need to convince others of it. We live in a culture now where even awakening has been commercialized. There are weekend retreats that promise enlightenment, apps that offer 5-minute nirvana, marketing slogans that turn sacred teachings into commodities. It's easy to be seduced by this. We want results. We want transformation in digestible bites. But true practice isn't a product. It isn't sexy. It's raw and quiet and often lonely. It's staring into yourself day after day, seeing not just the light, but all the shadows you've tucked away. And here's the twist that no brochure will ever tell you. Awakening doesn't make your problems disappear. It doesn't guarantee you'll never feel anger, jealousy, or sadness again. What it changes is your relationship with them. You stop identifying with every emotion. You stop letting them define you. You start seeing them as clouds passing through the sky, not ignoring them, not denying them, but not becoming them either. Take the example of a silent retreat. You sit, you breathe, you notice a flicker of clarity, a taste of deep stillness. You feel spacious, light. But then someone takes your seat in the dining hall, or the person beside you starts chewing too loudly. And just like that, all your serenity crumbles. Anger flashes up, or irritation, or judgment. But here's the beauty of it. That moment, that falling apart, is the practice. Seeing yourself react, watching the storm rise, smiling at the irony of it all, that's awareness in motion. One teacher put it this way: enlightenment isn't when you stop getting mad in traffic. It's when you get mad and notice, here I go again. That simple noticing, without shame, without judgment, is more powerful than any mystical experience. Because it's real. It's right here. It's not about controlling reality. It's about meeting it as it is, again and again. Science, too, has tried to get a grip on this. Researchers have placed long-term meditators, monks, yogis, dedicated lay people, into brain scanners. What they found is both fascinating and humbling. These individuals showed physical changes in their brains, higher levels of gamma waves, increased activity in areas related to focus and empathy, and decreased activation in the default mode network, the part of the brain associated with self-referential thinking. In simpler terms, They weren't obsessing over themselves as much. Yet when asked whether this proves enlightenment, scientists are the first to admit, no, these are just correlates, fingerprints left by the practice. But they don't capture the full mystery, because what awakening touches isn't just the mind, it's consciousness itself. And that, as any honest neuroscientist will admit, remains one of the greatest mysteries of our time. Consciousness isn't something you can put under a microscope. It's the very thing doing the observing. It's not the flame, but the light it casts. So while brain scans can show how meditation affects the hardware, the software, the awareness behind it all, remains untouched by metrics. As one researcher said, we can track what meditation does to the brain, but not what realization means to the person living it. This is where the modern conversation about enlightenment gets especially rich, because it's not just monks in robes anymore. Awakening isn't confined to a cave or a forest monastery. It's happening in kitchens and classrooms, in hospital corridors. A parent waking up at 3 a.m. to soothe a crying child might touch presence more deeply than someone chanting in a temple. A cashier offering genuine kindness to a difficult customer might embody compassion more fully than someone reciting scripture. One programmer, who had been meditating for years, described it like this: I used to think awakening would look like a blinding light or infinite peace, but now I realize it's just this moment, writing this code with full attention, feeling my breath, not wishing to be somewhere else. That's it. No fireworks, no fanfare, just presence, just now. And that's the gift of it. Awakening isn't about transforming into someone else. It's about being utterly, fully yourself, without the noise, without the masks. Not a better version, just a truer one. Because when you're no longer obsessed with proving your worth, you're free to live from it. This brings us to one of the most powerful expressions of Buddhist thought, the Bodhisattva. In essence, a Bodhisattva is someone who could walk away. They could choose to dissolve into nirvana, to be free from all suffering. But they don't. They stay, not out of duty, but out of love. They vow to return again and again, helping others cross the flood. Not until some people are free, but until all beings are free. This isn't mythology. This is the most radical kind of compassion. Imagine choosing to stay in a burning building, not because you're trapped, but because you want to help others find the way out. That's the Bodhisattva heart. Their vow is immense, almost impossible. May I be a boat for those who must cross the flood, a lamp for those in darkness, a bridge for those who seek the other shore. It's poetry, yes, but it's also a call to action. Enlightenment doesn't end with personal peace. It expands. It ripples out into the world through every choice, every gesture, every breath. And this shift, this turning from self to service, is where the deepest transformation happens. When you stop asking, how can I be free? And start wondering, how can I help others be free? Something inside you relaxes. The tight grip of ego softens. You become a vessel, not a seeker. Because in the Bodhisattva's world, suffering isn't the enemy. It's the teacher. It's the fire that softens the heart. When you suffered, you know the terrain. You recognize it in others. And instead of turning away, you move closer. You sit beside someone in pain, not because you can fix it, but because you've been there too. The Heart Sutra, one of Buddhism's most revered texts, says it clearly. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. That which we run from is not separate from that which we seek. Enlightenment doesn't require erasing the world. It asks us to see through it, to understand that all things arise and fall, and in that rising and falling, we find peace, not in permanence, but in the flow. This insight changes everything. It shifts our relationship with pain. It doesn't vanish suffering like a magic trick, but it transforms our experience of it. We stop resisting every discomfort. We stop building stories around it. We stop saying, this shouldn't be happening, and instead meet it with the question, what is this teaching me? This is especially relevant now, in a world pulled tight by division, stress, and endless noise. Every screen blinks with urgency. Every voice screams for attention. But underneath all the clamor, there's stillness. There's space. And awakening isn't found by running away from the chaos. It's discovered by learning how to breathe within it. The Dalai Lama once said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. It's so simple, so grounded, so real. That's the spirit of awakening, not floating above life, but diving deeper into it with kindness as your compass. And perhaps this is the clearest measure of realization, not in how serene you look during meditation, but in how you treat the person who annoys you most. Not in how many hours you sit, but in whether you can be present while someone is telling you something hard. Not in whether you've memorized scriptures, but in whether you can forgive. This path isn't glamorous, it's rarely Instagram-worthy, but it's real, and it's powerful, and anyone, absolutely anyone, can walk it. Not in some distant land or ideal condition, but here, now in the life you already have. One of the most quietly debated questions in the history of Buddhist thought isn't whether enlightenment exists, but how it happens. Does it strike like lightning, a sudden and irreversible shift in perception? Or does it unfold like dawn, gently illuminating layer by layer of our misunderstanding? This question has fueled centuries of contemplation, and even now in meditation halls across the world, you'll hear whispers of both paths, sudden, gradual, immediate, lifelong. The truth may be, as with most things on the spiritual path, not so easily labeled. Some traditions describe awakening as a single, shattering event, a moment where everything drops away, the self dissolves, and clarity floods in like water breaking through a dam. These stories are often passed down through Zen, known as Chan in China, where teachers speak of Satori, a flash of direct realization that changes everything. There's the tale of Kyogen, who, while sweeping the courtyard, heard a piece of broken tile strike bamboo. In that sharp crack, his mind opened. Not after years of study, not through logical progression, in an instant, and yet he'd been sweeping that courtyard for months. Or Hakuin, who sat in anguish for years wrestling with koans, those seemingly nonsensical riddles designed to unravel the thinking mind. Until one night, the sound of a distant temple bell sliced through his doubt and brought the universe into perfect focus. For these practitioners, realization didn't creep in, it exploded. But contrast that with the meticulous maps of the Theravada tradition. In texts like the Visuddhimagga, enlightenment is portrayed as a step-by-step journey with 16 stages of insight laid out like footprints in the sand. First, moral discipline, then deepening concentration, then insight into the impermanence of all things, then disillusionment, then equanimity. And only after passing through these gates, the possibility of awakening arises. No sudden lightning, just patient, persistent practice. So which is it? The explosive or the evolving? The sharp crack or the slow dawn? One 9th century Chinese master, Guifeng Zongmi, offered a synthesis that still resonates today. He said that enlightenment is sudden in principle, but gradual in realization. Imagine the sun breaking over the horizon. One moment it's not there, and the next it is. But even after it rises, it takes time for the light to touch everything. The moment of awakening might be immediate, but the embodiment of it takes a lifetime. And this idea isn't just ancient poetry, it's echoed by practitioners today. Many people describe sudden insights that felt life-changing, moments of deep stillness where the usual identity fell away, and they touch something vast and silent. But after a few days or weeks, the habits crept back in. Old fears, old reactions. That first glimpse didn't vanish. It just needed to be integrated, lived, expressed. As one teacher once told a retreat group, "Waking up is the easy part. Growing up takes time." What she meant was that realization may come in a flash, but learning how to embody it in your relationships, in your habits, in your words, that's the real work. You may realize in a moment that everything is interconnected, but living from that place while stuck in traffic or arguing with a partner, that's the daily practice. Even the Buddha's own life suggests both views. In some texts, his awakening is depicted as an immediate and total shift under the Bodhi tree. But in others, he speaks of years of preparation, of refining his understanding, of slowly disentangling from attachment. His disciples didn't all awaken at the same pace either. Some realized the truth within minutes of hearing a teaching. Others studied with him for years before the veil finally lifted. And maybe that's the point. There is no single template. Awakening isn't a fixed event you can schedule or engineer. It's more like falling in love or waking from a dream. You can't force it. You can't predict it. You can only prepare the ground, make space, and stay open. That's why so many stories of awakening involve the ordinary. Not sacred rituals or grand sermons, but sweeping, cooking, walking. Realization often arises not from intense effort, but from relaxed clarity, like a camera suddenly snapping into focus after you've been fiddling with the lens. And suddenly everything looks the same, but feels entirely different. And this is one of the most paradoxical aspects of awakening. Externally, nothing changes. You still wake up to the same body, the same bills, the same responsibilities. But internally, the entire landscape shifts. Craving loses its grip. Fear loosens, and even pain, while still painful, no longer feels like punishment. It's like wiping condensation off a mirror. What you see hasn't changed, but now you see it clearly. Yet here's the danger. In chasing that moment, whether sudden or gradual, many people forget that the goal isn't the experience, it's the transformation. Some get addicted to the flashes of insight, always waiting for another high. Others get caught in the structure of progress, constantly evaluating where they are on the map. But both approaches miss the heart of the practice, being fully here. Because the truth is, awakening doesn't always feel good. Sometimes it's painful. Seeing through illusion can mean facing everything you've been running from. Your grief, your guilt, your denial. There's a reason some teachers call it the dark night of the soul. You don't just gain light, you walk through your own shadow. But something extraordinary happens in that darkness. You stop avoiding, you stop bargaining, you stop pretending. And in that radical honesty, freedom begins to emerge. Not the kind that floats above suffering, but the kind that walks with it, unafraid. This is why the journey of awakening is often misunderstood. People expect serenity, peace, perhaps a permanent state of bliss. But ask any seasoned practitioner, and they'll tell you, awakening can be disruptive. It dismantles who you think you are. It can shake the foundations of your life, your work, even your relationships. It's not always gentle, but it's always real. And over time, something deeper settles in. Not the ecstatic clarity of a peak experience, but a quiet spaciousness, a sense of being rooted in something larger than thought, a confidence that doesn't depend on circumstances, an openness that can meet life as it is without needing to change it. This is the living of awakening, not just having seen the truth once, but continuing to see it in every moment, in the dishes, in the traffic, in the small, unnoticed acts of presence. One woman, a teacher of mindfulness and a parent of two, described it beautifully. I used to sit for hours trying to get enlightened, she said. Then one day, I was holding my baby at 3 a.m., completely exhausted, and I just stopped. I wasn't trying to be anywhere else. I wasn't waiting for the moment to be over. I was just there, holding him, breathing with him, and something opened. It was the most ordinary, sacred moment of my life. That's it. No incense, no chants, just full presence. And perhaps that's the deepest secret of enlightenment. It hides in plain sight. It's not an escape from life. It's intimacy with it, not an escape from suffering, but a different relationship with it. Not a rejection of the self, but seeing that the self was never as solid as we thought. And when you no longer need to defend, prove, or chase anything, what's left is compassion. That's why awakening and compassion are never separate. You can't see the interdependence of all things and remain indifferent. The moment you understand that your pain and someone else's pain are not two, your heart naturally softens. Your actions naturally shift. You don't need a rule book. You are the rule book. That's why the most awakened beings aren't those who speak the most eloquently, but those whose very presence feels like home. They radiate a kind of warmth, not because they're trying to, but because they're not hiding. They've met themselves fully, so they can meet you too. And here's the beautiful part. None of this is out of reach. You don't need to change your life. You don't need to quit your job or join a monastery. You just need to stop, look, listen. You need to be willing to meet this moment exactly as it is, with the fullness of your attention. Because that's where awakening always happens. Not in the future, not in the past, but here, in this breath, in this heartbeat, in this life. And the more you show up, the more the illusion begins to fall away. The more the old stories lose their grip. The more reality shines through, simple, vivid, untouched. You realize you were never separate. You realize you were never broken. You realize you were never alone. And that realization, whether sudden or slow, whether loud or silent, is the beginning of a different kind of freedom. One that doesn't rely on anything, one that can't be taken away, one that has always quietly been waiting. The more we peel back the layers of what awakening really is, the clearer it becomes that enlightenment isn't some kind of spiritual decoration. It doesn't make you more important or give you mystical powers to dazzle others. It's not a badge, not a performance, not a crown. It's more like coming home after a long, exhausting journey. A home you'd forgotten existed. A home that had been there the whole time, quietly waiting behind every breath, every step, every heartbeat. But the world rarely presents it that way. Enlightenment has been wrapped in a thick layer of myths, marketing, and misunderstanding. Some of these myths make it seem like an escape hatch. Like if you're enlightened, you'll never suffer again, never get upset, never be confused. Others make it sound like a secret prize reserved for only the most devoted monks, the ones who isolate themselves from everything worldly and meditate in caves for decades. These images are powerful but misleading. They create distance. They make awakening feel like something over there, out of reach, locked away in someone else's story. In truth, the potential for awakening is already embedded in your own experience. It's not about adding something new. It's about removing the dust that's been covering what was always present. The Vietnamese Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh used to say, "We are here to awaken from the illusion of our separateness, not to gain a new identity, not to become superhuman, just to remember something ancient and simple, that we were never apart." And yet the forgetting feels so real. From the moment we're born, we're trained to build an identity, to polish it, defend it, compare it. We're told who we are, what we should want, what success looks like. We start layering ourselves with expectations, fears, labels. By the time we're adults, we're carrying so much that we've forgotten what it feels like to simply be, to breathe without needing to prove anything, to sit still without 1,000 mental checklists whispering in our ears. So the journey toward awakening often begins with a kind of unraveling, not a breakdown, but a breaking open. You start to question the stories you've always believed. The ideas you've carried for years start to feel strangely hollow. Maybe the things that used to bring pleasure don't feel the same, or a quiet sense of dissatisfaction begins to grow, even in the middle of a life that looks successful. These moments aren't failures, they're cracks in the wall. And through those cracks, the light of awareness begins to pour in. One man, a therapist who had been practicing mindfulness for over a decade, told a story during a retreat. He said that one day, sitting in traffic, something unexpected happened. He was late, cars were honking, and he felt the usual irritation bubbling up. But then, without effort, he simply watched it. The irritation didn't disappear, it just became transparent. He could feel the tightness in his chest, the clenching in his jaw, but there was also a vast spaciousness behind it. He said, "For the first time, I didn't need it to go away. I wasn't resisting it. I was just with it." And that simple moment, ordinary, uneventful, was one of the most powerful shifts he had ever experienced. Because that's how it often unfolds. Not through a voice booming from the heavens, but in traffic, in a line at the grocery store, in a conversation that doesn't go your way. It's in those moments that your practice shows itself, not in how peaceful you are when everything is perfect, but in how present you are when things fall apart. That's why the most awakened people often don't look enlightened. They don't walk around beaming light or speaking in riddles. They listen more than they speak. They laugh easily. They make mistakes and admit them. Their wisdom doesn't separate them, it connects them. It's not an aura. It's a kindness that shows up in the smallest places. And this points us to something often forgotten in spiritual circles. Awakening is relational. It's not just about sitting on a cushion and dissolving your ego in solitude. It's about how that insight translates into how you treat others, how you show up when someone is suffering, how you listen, how you forgive, how you hold space for people who see the world differently than you. The ego always wants to be special. It wants its enlightenment to be unique, superior, rare. But true awakening reveals the opposite, that we are not separate, that your joy is not different from mine, that compassion isn't a virtue, it's a natural expression of clarity. When you see clearly, you can't turn away. You can't ignore the suffering around you and call yourself awakened. That's why the image of the Bodhisattva is so powerful. It's not just a symbol, it's a living invitation. A Bodhisattva is someone who realizes they could exit the cycle of suffering, but chooses to stay. Not because they have to, but because their heart won't let them do otherwise. They see the interconnectedness of all life, and from that seeing, compassion flows. One teacher described the Bodhisattva vow as the willingness to be the one who shows up, even when there's nothing to gain. No spiritual reward, no enlightenment points, just the steady presence of someone who says, "I'll be here for you, even in your worst moment." That's not a fantasy. That's the kind of awakening we need more than ever right now. And what's remarkable is how these teachings, once considered esoteric and distant, have started to find their way into everyday language. Neuroscience, psychology, trauma therapy, they're all beginning to echo what the Buddha taught centuries ago. That the mind is not fixed, that our patterns are not permanent, that awareness itself has the power to transform. But even as science confirms these truths, there's still a mystery at the heart of awakening that can't be captured by studies or brain scans. You can map the neural correlates of mindfulness, but you can't measure the felt experience of compassion. You can describe the default mode network going quiet, but that tells you nothing about the peace of holding your dying parent's hand with full presence. There's a depth to human experience that lives beyond the reach of data, and that's where awakening happens, in that unmeasurable, uncontrollable human space. That's why no one can give you awakening. No guru, no app, no retreat. They can point, they can support, but the seeing, that's yours. And it doesn't always look like what you expected. In fact, it probably won't. Sometimes awakening feels like grief, like the sudden realization that you've lived most of your life asleep, chasing things that never mattered. Sometimes it feels like terror, like watching the ground fall out from under every identity you've clung to. Sometimes it feels like silence, like sitting on a park bench and realizing, for no particular reason, that everything is exactly as it should be, even the things that hurt. And after that seeing, life continues. Bills still arrive, arguments still happen, you still lose your keys, but something has shifted. You're no longer trying to control every outcome. You're not gripping so tightly. There's a trust, a surrender, not to fate, but to presence. And that's what makes the journey so subtle, because enlightenment doesn't come with a certificate. There's no voice that says, "Congratulations, you've arrived." Often it comes and goes unnoticed. You realize months later that the things that used to trigger you no longer hold the same charge. You notice you're more patient, more curious, more gentle with yourself and others. That's awakening, not dramatic, not flashy, just real, just lived. And it invites you into a different kind of freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from the need to always be doing. The freedom from the belief that something's missing. The freedom to sit with what is without flinching. One of the most common things people say after awakening is, "I thought it would feel different." And that makes sense. We've been trained to expect spiritual experiences to feel cosmic, euphoric, transcendent. But awakening often feels like finally being sober after a long intoxication. Like looking around and seeing everything clearly, perhaps for the first time. It's not the world that changes, it's your relationship to it. You're not floating above your life. You're sinking more deeply into it. You're not becoming someone else. You're becoming more fully yourself. You're not escaping suffering. You're learning how to meet it without running. And all of this, every step, every misstep, every breath, is the path. You don't need to wait. You don't need to be perfect. You just need to begin, not later. Now, in this very moment, because the door is already open and it was never locked. One of the most unexpected aspects of the path toward awakening is how ordinary it begins to feel once the illusions start to fall away. Not because it loses meaning, but because it becomes so woven into the fabric of daily life that it stops needing to announce itself. It stops needing to feel special. This is perhaps the greatest misunderstanding that seekers face. The idea that awakening should feel like a dramatic departure from everything we know, like crossing a threshold into a new dimension. But what if it's not a departure at all? What if it's a return? A return to what's always been here, to the sound of your breath, the sensation of water on your hands as you wash them, the look in someone's eyes when they're being fully seen. These are not footnotes to some larger, more important spiritual goal. These are the path. These are where the door to awakening opens, not in a distant future, but in this moment, right now, through the simplest acts. And yet, the mind wants something else. It wants signs. It wants proof. It wants an experience big enough to silence all doubts forever. That craving for certainty, that deep hunger for something definitive, is often the very thing keeping us stuck, because the truth isn't always loud. Often it whispers. Often it's hiding beneath the story we're trying to tell ourselves about how things are supposed to go. That's the strange paradox of the path. It's the seeking itself that often obscures the goal. You meditate hoping for calm, and your striving makes you restless. You long for insight, and your grasping clouds your perception. Like trying to smooth a pond with your hand, your very effort disturbs the surface. But when you stop trying to fix the water and just watch it, it becomes still on its own. This is why the teachers of old were often so cryptic. They knew that if they told you too much, your mind would turn it into something to chase, something to conquer. So instead, they pointed you back to your own experience, back to the sound of the wind, the feeling of your feet on the ground, back to the bowl in your hands after breakfast, back to now. There's a story of a student who asked his teacher, "How do I attain enlightenment?" The teacher replied, "Have you finished your rice?" The student nodded. "Then go wash your bowl." That's the teaching, not because the bowl is sacred, not because the rice was special, but because awareness isn't found in some mystical plane. It's found in washing, in breathing, in being. But how many of us actually want that answer? Deep down, many are disappointed by the ordinariness of awakening. We've been promised fireworks, transcendence, a crown of light. We want to be lifted above our humanity, not deeper into it. But that's the gift most don't expect. Awakening doesn't erase your humanness. It softens it. It allows you to be fully human, fully flawed, fully here. It lets you feel grief without being consumed by it. It lets you hold joy without clinging. It gives you the capacity to be hurt